Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is a first time for me doing a webinar. Normally in the work that I do, there's a lot of interaction with everyone, and it's a two-way process. So one-way process is not an easy task for me. So it's something that I'll have to navigate along with your help. Okay, so the way this will work, the purpose of today, just one second. Yeah, the purpose of today is really to understand the underlying principles behind the people-related challenges, deploying which can enable building organization and business. What I have done essentially is draw out from my experience of attracting good people, retaining and engaging talent, measuring and evaluating performance, determining structures and designations, determining remuneration, and determining people growth or promotion decisions. Now on each of these, what I'm going to cover are certain principles which I have found universally applicable across organizations. For every organization, finally what you choose to do is a decision that you have to take. Right? What I'm hoping for is that these principles will resonate with you and will make sense and help you decide what is relevant for you. Okay? All right. In between, as Viral said, there will be polls. So after the first and the third aspect, we will do two polls just to get a sense of how you are experiencing. And at any point in time, if you want to raise some questions, please type them and send them to Viral. And once he shares the relevant ones with me, I'll figure out at what point in time I can share my response to that. Okay, here we go. And by the way, as I do walk you through this, there are some questions that I put down. The purpose of this is to help you reflect as you listen to the presentation. In a situation where it was a two-way interaction, I would have heard your responses. Okay? So we will have to live with that as we walk through the presentation. Okay, so let me start with the first one about attracting good people. You know, what I want you to reflect on is think about the challenges that you're facing in attracting good people. So that's the one question as we move on, and I share with you the underlying principles that I want you to think about. The second is to think about what attracts people fundamentally. And in thinking about this question, what I want you to do is to think about people to whom you feel attracted, people with whom you want to work, and think about what really makes you want to work with them. What I'm going to share with you are my thoughts around what attracts people fundamentally. So the first aspect is really about having clarity on who you or who your organization is all about. It's really based on the principle that all of us, including organizations, are like magnets. We will attract some people and we will not attract some people. Let's take a few examples. Okay, when you think about purpose, how much do you think NDDB, an organization like NDDB Amul, would pay compared to a lot of the other FMCG organizations? The reality is not much. But yet, there are many people who are willing to work for that organization, good people who are willing to work for that organization, primarily because they are attracted by the purpose that that organization stands for. Similarly, let me get a bit autobiographical. Even in Marico, many years ago, and at a time when we were an unknown organization, the whole purpose of creating a distinctive culture which would make it really enjoyable for people to work, something which did not exist at that point in time in most organizations, was a differentiating factor. So in some way, that was the purpose at that point in time. The point I'm trying to make is that when organizations are clear about the purpose, they are clear about what they are offering, whether you call it purpose or you call it a differentiation, chances are you will start attracting certain kind of people. And then people who believe in that purpose are likely to get attracted to you. The second is really about your values. Each of us have our own set of values, and when you reflect about the kind of people you are attracted to or whom you feel comfortable working with, chances are that they share the same set of values as you. Fortunately, we have two organizations in India, and I'm sure when I take their names, you will have an image of each one of them. So Reliance and Tata's. Now each one stands for a certain values. I'm not getting into judgments about right or wrong values, but chances are that some people are likely to feel more comfortable with Reliance than with Tata's, and the other way around. So when we start becoming conscious of our values and sharing what our values are, people experience those values and then get attracted or repelled by the same. So having clarity about that makes a lot of difference in the way we work in the organization. So that's something which is extremely important in being able to attract people. And also it helps very often in retaining good people. A small example, and this is someone from Ascent itself. It's an organization run by a friend of mine, and he works in the area of green chemistry. Now a lot of analysts, quality control analysts who work with him, know that the purpose of the organization is to really help improve the environment, and that is something that they are quite fond of. Okay? They also value that. So even if there are offers which are a couple of $1,000 more than what they are getting, and mind you, they are not getting paid very heavily, they have chosen, and most of them have chosen to still be around. Sure, if the compensation is twice, thrice, some people do get swayed by that, but a lot of people still choose to be there. So this is something which is an experience or an insight that I want you to consider. The second, when you are looking out for recruiting people or attracting people, having clarity on what you are offering to the individual is very important. What's the role, what's the kind of challenge that the person will face is extremely important. Contrary to a belief that a lot of people have that money is the only thing which drives people, for many people, the right kind of role and the right kind of challenge is very important. You may be able to get a person by throwing money, but after some time, if there is not sufficient challenge for the individual, chances are that the person will leave. So that's again a choice that you have to make. Okay? What's the role or the challenge that you're offering? And again, many organizations do not think about this before they go out to recruit someone. The third aspect is about being clear on what you're seeking. When you say good, what do you mean by a good person? Again, this is an area where some people only look at the qualification, the experience, the skills, and fail to look at other aspects that are important, which will make a difference in their kind of an organization. Okay, if you are an organization which believes in giving people a free hand, then you will need to look for people who can take the initiative and run with the ball rather than waiting to be told what needs to be done. On the other hand, if you are an organization which is going to dictate everything that needs to be done, then if you get people who want to work independently, you're likely to end up with failures. So being clear on what good means to you is extremely important. And then designing questions at the time of recruitment around those to understand and assess whether the individual fits those parameters or not is extremely crucial. So what is good for one may not necessarily be good for the other, which is why it's important that each organization defines what good means in their context. Okay? So this is about attracting good people. So let me move to the next part of retaining and engaging talent. Again, there are a few questions I want you to think about. At what point in time do you feel most engaged? Times when you feel that, time is just flying by, you have no clue of time. things are really happening, you're on a roll. What are those moments when you feel most engaged? What kind of things make you feel most engaged? Okay. The second question I wanted to reflect on as we get into details of this is what causes you to sustain relationships for long? What is it that you experience in relationships where you would feel like sustaining it for long? So here are some thoughts about what engages people. One is very clearly meaningful work. When people get into the organization, a lot of them are searching for meaning. They're wanting to do something which gives them a sense of accomplishment, a sense of contributing to the organization. So meaningful work is extremely important. And again, for different people, what gives them meaning can be different. So it's important to understand what is meaningful work for that individual. The second element, which in some way enables giving meaningful work, is about matching strengths and interests of the individual and the work. Again, now very often you may wonder that how can we do that for everyone? May not be for all, but to the extent that you can start understanding what the person is good at, what the person really enjoys, and design the roles or give them work of that nature, chances are that they will really enjoy and they will continue doing that for long. The third aspect is about giving them appropriate decision-making authority with accountability. Again, in the last aspect I had shared that if you're an organization which loves to dictate, then it's better to get people who want to follow. While that is true, at the same time, even at that level and with that kind of culture, there are certain things that people eventually want to take decisions. That's one part. The second is that if the bosses do not start pushing decisions down the line, then everything will keep coming up to them, and then they will get paralyzed. They will not be able to move forward, or they will become the bottleneck. So being able to give appropriate decision-making authority with accountability is important, which means that they should know that they're going to be held accountable for whatever decision they make, which doesn't mean that they cannot make mistakes. They can make mistakes as long as they learn from them. So that ground rule needs to be clear. Having said that, it's important that they know that they can take decisions without fear. The fourth aspect which really engages people is if they begin to get involved in determining or influencing their own future and the company's future. Increasingly, more and more people want to be involved in and have a say in what's happening in their environment. So it's not only about organizations. I'm sure if you look at your own families, and especially the younger generation, there's an increasing need for them to be involved in the family decisions. And that is something which then gets their commitment and buy-in. Similarly, in organizations, the more you can create scenarios where people are involved in determining the company future or influencing the company future, it will give them a sense of belongingness, of being part of the organization, and therefore will enhance their level of engagement and increase the chances of retention. So for example, look at the various things, even in terms of a strategy. In a rollout of a strategy, do you ever discuss how this can get executed and take ideas on board and be willing to modify it if required, rather than telling them, look, that this is what needs to be done. This is how we will do our business. Again, in terms of policies, are they involved in looking at what the policy should be after having understood why that policy is important for them and for the organization, and in what, under what circumstances or with what boundary conditions should they be creating the policy? Now, if that is an area where they start getting involved, chances are, again, they will feel that sense of ownership and belongingness. The fifth aspect is really about continuous learning and growth. For most people, actually for all of us, the reality is that learning is lifelong. And yet, very often in organizations, people are made to do the same work over and over again and given no opportunities to try something new. And when people stop learning, they are likely to become less skilled. So look at the people in your own organizations. Do people with 10 years experience really have 10 years of experience, or is it 1 year multiplied by 10? Now, how does continuous learning and growth happen? When people are involved with different aspects of the organization, when they get to interact with different functions and be part of let's say a project, or be part of a situation where they can contribute from their perspective, they also begin to understand and appreciate the other perspective. So, webinar. Yeah. Sorry for that interruption. Harsh was around. The other is that when they're invited to take on new challenges, it helps them learn and grow, because that's the time when they can start stretching themselves, when they can learn new skills, do new things, experiment, and thereby begin to learn some things. And it's a proven research that 60 to 70% of the learning for individuals, learning and growth, happens when they take on real life challenges. Okay? Challenges which really get them to stretch is something which gets them to learn and grow. About 20 to 30% of the learning and growth happens when people are given feedback and coaching, when bosses sit with them to help them look at what they can do differently, give them feedback on how they are performing, what are things that they've done well, what is it that they could have done differently, is when a lot of learning and growth happens. And only 10% happens through classroom training. So again, think about it in your organization. Where is the maximum time and energy invested in learning and growth for people? Is it in classroom training, or is it also in the other aspects? Think about your own journey and your own growth. At what points in time did you experience maximum learning and growth? Chances are that, again, for a lot of you, when you look back, it would have happened when you were faced with some real difficult challenges. And when you were able to deal with them and learn from them, chances are you felt a tremendous sense of personal growth and development. And that's true for everyone. So when there is an opportunity in the organization to continuously learn and grow, is where people feel more and more engaged. And that's where it increases their chances of retention. So as I said, retention is really an outcome of great engagement. Okay? So these are some of the principles or some of the practices that will help you retain and engage people. All right. If there are questions, you send them on. Otherwise, I'm moving to the third aspect, and then after that, we'll do one more poll. The third aspect is about measuring and evaluating performance. So here are a few questions. Think about, when are you able to assess performance of anything or anyone? Is it when you just sit back and in hindsight and look at something which has happened recently and pass a judgment? Or is it something when you're clear about what you want to assess and then look at data vis-a-vis that? When you know the parameters, also think about, when should you be knowing the parameters of assessment? If someone were to assess you and told you at the end that, look, this is the basis on which I'm going to assess you, and you had no clue about it at the start, or maybe had a faint clue about it at the start, and maybe clue about some things but not everything, how would you feel? So think about what will help you to assess performance, and once you know what parameters, when do you think you should know about those parameters of assessment? So here are the things that really help you measure and evaluate performance fairly clearly. One, when there's clarity on what you expect from the individual. Now this is at one level an easier said than done thing, because it requires the boss to sit and think about what you expect at the start. And also, what are the standards of performance? So you want the person to bring in sales. What is the kind of number you're looking at which tells you that it will be good performance, and what's the number which will tell you that it's great performance? Now, if this is known at the start, chances are the person will also be able to work towards it. In the absence of that, at the end, if you tell the person, look, I really expected you to do 100, you've done 80. And the person said, but you never told me at the start. You'll be in for trouble. So being clear on what you expect from the individual is extremely important. And when you think about it, think about the last assessment that you've made of an individual. Again, chances are that if you drill down your own thought about why you rated the person you did the way you did, there are some parameters that you have used in your mind. The only challenge is, can you identify those parameters at the start and articulate them to the individual at the start rather than talking about it at the end. Okay. The second aspect, which is very important, is availability of measures for those standards. So for example, you want to measure how well you are supplying to your customers. Right? And the measure of performance, or the standard of performance, is the percentage of on-time delivery. However, if you do not have a mechanism by which you are measuring that, there is no way you'll be able to actually evaluate the performance. It will only be subjective or a feel good on the basis of some feedback that you get from the customer. So what you will need to decide is that if that standard of performance is absolutely crucial, then you need to invest in creating a measure for that standard. The third aspect is really about creating transparency on the progress. So while an individual, or you may have set the expectations from the individual and the standards are there, and you have measures to measure those standards, if there is no review and sharing around how it is, how the performance is progressing, then there are chances that there will be a lot of surprise at the end of the period. And at that point in time, both of you or one of you could feel cheated. So setting up mechanisms by which you can be transparent about the progress through the year helps a lot. And that's also the opportunity for you to give feedback. And as I said, sharing all of this with the individual at the start is extremely important. Because at the end, if you were to share with the person, it's a situation where nobody can do anything about it. So sharing all this at the start with the individual is extremely important. There's also the option of actually creating it with the individual. Remember, we spoke about involving the person in influencing the company or influencing their own progress. This is one of the opportunities. Get the person to think about what they should live up to, what should be their standards, and also get them to think about those in the context of what they can contribute to the organization. So when there's a connect that they can see with how and what they're contributing to the organization, chances are they will feel a sense of importance. And when they can contribute and dialogue with you about what should be expected from them and how they will be assessed, chances are that they will own it up far more and work towards it. And then at the end, when based on data, you or they were to assess, they are likely to end up with a similar assessment. Okay? So this is about measuring and evaluating performance, and you need to look at this in the larger context that the purpose of a performance system is to help people get clarity on what is expected from them, and at the same time get them to see how they can contribute to the organization in the larger picture of the organization, which means they need to be clear and know what is the larger picture of the organization. So let me respond to the question. Can you just repeat the question again, Viral?
It's how do you handle when there are two stakeholders and expectation and message passed on is different to both the stakeholders?
Okay, very important area. When there are two stakeholders, the question you have to ask yourself is, first, how are you ensuring that the two stakeholders are aligned to the same purpose?
Just sorry
and
to
this goes back to the.
Sorry, Pankaj, just to add on, budgets are set, planning and all is already done. Just to give for that question some more pointers come. Yeah.
Sure. So this is, as I understand, the question is in the context of what has already happened. So there is something that you could do immediately, but more importantly, look at the phenomena. If this, chances are that this phenomena is something which repeats itself over and over again. Now, there are two possibilities. One, where there is a mismatch in the values that you hold and the values that the other person holds. If that be the case, it will be important that the two of you dialogue and arrive at how you want to take the relationship forward. And sometimes this could be facilitated by someone external, or if there's enough maturity between the two to be able to do it on your own, then have a dialogue across. As far as the current situation is concerned, it's quite, sorry, the other possibility is that it's not about a mismatch of values, but it's that you've not dialogued at the start and aligned on what you want to focus as an organization for that year, and then chosen to communicate it in the same manner across the organization. In the current context, since some things have already been decided, it will be worthwhile even now to have a joint dialogue to take stock of where we are and then recalibrate for the balance period and change course if need be. But the fundamental principle that both of you are aligned to the same thinking is extremely important. The worst thing that can happen in any organization is that people down the line get different signals from stakeholders. It is similar to a situation where in the family, the kids get different signals from the parents. They are likely to be very, very confused. So that's what is going to happen. So if you can sit across with your with your partner and dialogue it through, it will be extremely useful. All right, I hope it gives you some clarity. Difficult for me to get a sense whether it does or not. So if the question remains, please pose it subsequently. In the meantime, I'll move forward. The fourth element that I want to talk about is about determining the structure and designations. How do you decide what is the structure that you should have in your organization and the designations that you should look at? Okay. So here are some of the questions that you need to ask and be clear about. First of all, the structure has to be in the context of the strategy of what you're trying to do over the next 3 to 5 years. So the first question you need to be clear is, what really are the key strategies over the next 3 to 5 years? The next is to look at that in the context of those strategies, what kind of competencies would you need to be able to deliver those strategies? Now, it's possible that some of those already exist in the organization and there are some that you need to build. For example, if you want to expand geographically and let's say go overseas, and all the experience available in the organization today is about domestic selling. And you realize that what you need is competence to be able to operate in the international markets. Now that's a point when you have a choice. So you'll have to start looking at what roles or functions does it point to. Does it point to a role of an international business development person, or is your function, is your organization so structured that it is, let's say you're going to sell to a certain channel or a category, and that is common across geographies. Now in the first case, where the common factor is the location and the geography, you would perhaps need a role specifically for the international business. And in that case, you will need to look at whether someone internally can be groomed to take that on, which is where you have to answer the next question of what are the strengths of the existing people, or look at whether you need to get someone from outside. Similarly, if it is, in the second case, if the business is such where it is more channel dependent, which may be true across geographies, or a product dependent where it is true across geographies, or service dependent where it is true across geographies, it may point to splitting up the existing structure in a manner where one person handles a particular area and then focuses across multiple geographies. For example, in a placement consulting organization, if they are recruiting people for a certain industry, that vertical could cut across geographies, and therefore they may have a structure and a role where an individual who may have earlier been focusing on 2 or 3 verticals may focus only on one vertical but do it across geographies. On the other hand, it may be a scenario where the nature of relationships that have to get built are very different from geography to geography, and therefore you need to look at a completely different person. So when you start answering these questions, you will start getting a sense of the implications that it has for responsibility levels, designations, and the reporting. So if it is something new which is being set up, and at that stage you want to personally supervise it, you may want that individual or that role to report to you. However, if it is something which is matured and it is a matter of just expansion, that role may require to report to perhaps a head of sales. So thinking through all of this is very critical. Sometimes in organizations, people don't think this through and just create a structure and keep on adding layers and layers of designations without being clear what is the difference across different designations and different levels. And that is what starts creating problems in the organization. So let me give you a few examples of some of these structures. Okay, now this is getting a bit theoretical, but I'll also talk after this about some common issues that organizations face. So the first is where it is a function-based structure. Okay, so there are different functions in the organization reporting into the CEO. Typically, this happens when the organization is small. When I'm saying small as in it has reached at least a medium size, where each function is becoming important, and somebody needs to head the function, and there needs to be a team below that head. In that case, you are likely to move into a function-based structure. Over a period, as people evolve, as the organization evolves, if there are more and more business lines, product lines, geography lines appearing, then chances are you would have to move into an SBU kind of a structure where the head has a P&L accountability for that vertical. In that case, that person will report again. So there will be multiple SBU heads reporting into the CEO, and below them could be various functions which exist. The third kind of structure which begins to evolve in organizations is a matrix structure. A matrix structure is one where, depending on the requirement of the organization, so if the requirement is that there is a lot of learning across geographies, across locations, and some functions need to be very, very specialized, the organization could move into a matrix structure where the people at a location report into the location head. However, for certain functions, they also report to a functional head. Now, this is a pretty a tough structure to manage, because very often in this, if there's no clarity in what the central roles will do and what the functional roles or the locational roles will do, it can lead to all kinds of clashes. In any case, to make any structure work, it's important to be clear about what is the role that each functional head or SBU head or department head will play. I want to walk us through some of the common issues which happen as organizations evolve. And this is where there's a problem. So one of the common issues is, the organization starts and then people say we'll deal with it when the time comes. I don't know if you've experienced it. Okay? So right now we are in the mode of growing. So let's grow. We'll keep adding roles. We'll give whatever designations people want, and at a certain point in time we'll deal with it. And then suddenly they realize that they've grown so rapidly that the whole structure and roles and accountabilities are in a mess. So the faster you can think through where you want to take the organization, and in that context, what is the better it will be facing, is people are concerned that if I start sharing future plans, especially on the structure, it will unnerve people. We start believing that people are pretty fragile. And then in the absence of that, people are left wondering what is the likely growth that's going to happen, how is the structure going to evolve, what opportunities will be available, and then they operate with their own myths and their own fears. So again, taking the bold step of being able to share the future plan on the structure and helping people see how you will populate those structure, on what basis will you move people there, is something which is extremely important. The third issue which I've heard is something which I spoke of earlier, that people say, look, give him, her, any designation he or she wants, especially when you're small and you're recruiting. You quickly decide and start giving designations left, right, and center. And that's again which starts becoming an issue over a period of time, because if it is not thought through, then as the organization grows and the person is not really capable to fit the higher order role, it becomes a problem. So for example, some organization may suddenly say, look, we'll give this person a VP finance, and then the person may actually be capable only of doing a finance manager role. But as the organization grows and then you really need a VP finance, you're stuck, because you don't see the individual growing. The individual is good, and then when you have to get another person, you're struggling, because then you'll have to create another designation which becomes president of finance. And this is how very often you'll find multiple designations in organizations which have not been thought through. So thinking through the rationale for the designations upfront is important. Again, in a way that reflects your philosophy and thinking and becomes a form of a magnet for those whom you have to attract. The fourth is a common issue is, how can I give a higher designation? The other person is senior to him or her. So I have an existing person. How can I give a junior person a higher designation? Now, this typically happens when we are not clear on the basis of giving designations. So you need to think through is the basis of designations the competence that the person brings in, the role and the expectations that you have from the expectations that you have from that kind of role, or is it about seniority? So is seniority going to drive designations, or is competence going to drive designations? In the absence of that clarity, this is likely to be an issue. The next issue is also similar to this. He or she has less years of experience. Let's give a lower designation right now. Okay? So believing that while the person is coming for a particular role which calls for a higher designation or a higher level of responsibility, and you have assessed that the person is capable for that, and yet just because of lesser years of experience you give the person a lower designation. Now if it has happened through a process of dialogue, it may still be okay, but very often it happens because remuneration is linked to the designation and you don't want to pay the person so much. After some time, if your assessment is right that the person is actually capable of handling something higher, the person is likely to start feeling cheated, and that's when the person starts getting disengaged. Then correcting it again takes a lot of effort. So that's something that I also want you to reflect, whether it's an experience or an issue that you are facing. The last issue that I've heard is again this whole thing of we'll add designations as we go along. Okay, so suddenly you have a junior manager, then a deputy manager, then senior manager, and again the rationale for the designations gets lost. And then you're struggling with figuring out who to move where, and then the only way to move people becomes on the basis of seniority and the time they have spent in the organization. So this is again another issue which I have experienced people and organizations facing. All right, I'm going to move to the next issue about next aspect of determining the remuneration. Again, how you determine remuneration is in an organization or for a given role is something that quite a few organizations struggle with. So very often it is quite random or haphazard. Now here are a few questions that you can look at in terms of determining the remuneration. One aspect is to look at what are your critical roles. And criticality has to be in the context of the impact it will have on the organization. Even at the same level, it's quite possible that some roles are far more critical than others. For example, if you are a consumer product organization, chances are marketing and R&D play a significant role. If you're a manufacturing organization, it's possible that quality and new products again play a critical role. So different organizations could have different roles which are critical, and being competitive in vis-a-vis the market on those roles is extremely important. Now if that's the philosophy, then you're likely to have a rationale for why you're paying and how much you're paying. In the absence of that, chances are you'll end up paying pretty similar, and then the reality will hit you. The reality that every organization has a limited capacity to pay. And in that scenario, either everyone will end up getting lower than the market, and then you may not be able to attract people in critical roles. So the second question that you need to think about is, where are you going to get your talent from for that role? If the industries that you are looking for getting your talent are ones which are high paying, then it is going to be important to decide whether you want to pay that much or you want to recruit from those industries. Okay? So the two are linked. Which roles are critical and where you're going to get your talent from. The third aspect which you of course need to look at is the organization's ability to pay, both in the short term and the long term. So based on your ability to pay, based on which are the critical roles and what you want to pay with the market, which is the other philosophy that you want to look at will determine how much remuneration you can pay to different roles. And then there's the long term. So in terms of determining the structure of the remuneration, your ability to pay in the short term and the long term can help you decide how you want to structure remuneration. If the short term ability is low and the long term is higher, the structure could be skewed towards more long-term means of paying people. So, for example, long-term incentives or stock options are some ways of structuring the pay when the long-term ability is going to be higher. And there are businesses where you know that once it starts picking up, suddenly the profitability will zoom after a certain point in time. So you need to be clear about that so that you can communicate to people when you are selecting them, and also the internal people when you are doing the revisions. The last piece is about the philosophy that you want to follow. And again, there are cultural implications of the philosophy that you follow for remuneration. There are some organizations which choose to say that they want to ensure that nobody feels dissatisfied. Chances are they will take the philosophy of paying everyone the same thing at a given level. Now, on the face of it, it does look like nobody is going to be dissatisfied. At the same time, there will be some who will feel cheated. And there are those who would, and there are roles for which you may not be able to get people. So that's a choice that the organization has to make. On the other hand, if you choose to differentiate, you have to live with the consequences that some will be dissatisfied and may choose to leave. So therefore, what philosophy you operate from, how you implement it is going to have a linkage. And each of the philosophies will have an implication on the culture that you are building or want to build. So making a choice of that philosophy whose unintended consequences on the culture you are willing to live with is going to be extremely critical. So that's about determining the remuneration. Let me share with you some of the issues that I've experienced, especially in small organizations. When people don't want to discuss it openly, you know, I've heard entrepreneurs say, I will give each one what I want to give. How can they expect something? How can people tell me what to give? Now, this is fine as long as you're prepared to have disengaged people in the organization. So that's one. And this is where people have not thought through the approach that they really want to take. The second, which I've heard a common issue, is about we should only give X percentage higher than the market. Now, when it is just a fixed percentage, this at times does not take into account the organization's capability to pay. And then suddenly, you could either end up in a situation where you are hurting the organization, or on the other side, you could be in a situation where being rigid about it does not allow you to get good individuals in a certain role. Similarly, a third thing which I've heard, that increases cannot be more than Y% for an individual. Some organizations again have this myth around trying to cap the increase without having a clear thinking of where they want to really peg the remuneration for the individual. The consequence of this is that at times you may have got a person who's come in at a lower pay, and at that point in time it was what the person was getting. However, over a period of time, maybe the person has started delivering far better than some others who were there in the organization. Now, if you don't take cognizance of that, and it may mean that for the person to catch up with the others and be in line with them may require a high increase. However, if you're not cognizant of that and you're only driven by the thinking that increase cannot be more than Y%, chances are that the person may start feeling cheated. And then you will again lose out on a good person. So again, the comes back to being clear about what is the basis on which you will make increases and being clear about what purpose you want that basis to serve. Similarly, the last one, which is again about the philosophy, is where people believe that everyone should get the same increase. Once again, those who are good and who've been contributing feel cheated. And eventually it could lead to a culture where people who've been contributing also start contributing less or go out of the organization because they realize that no matter what they do, it's going to be the same for everyone. Okay? So please think about whether you're facing any of these issues, and then think about what philosophy or approach you would like to take given the context of your organization and your business. All right. Let me move to a next aspect of determining people growth decisions. Think about how do people grow in your organization. Now here are some things that you could look at. When you look at different responsibility levels of the organization, think about what do you expect from each level of responsibility. Firstly, are there clear levels of responsibility, or is your criteria of people growth giving them newer and newer designations, and that's all that happens? When you only give on the basis of experience and keep giving newer designations, chances are people move up, so-called move up, without real expansion of capability and sometimes without really handling new responsibility. So over a period of time, the only criteria that is left with is to keep moving people up based on the time they have spent in the organization. When you start thinking about the different levels of responsibility and are clear about what you expect, then it allows you to start thinking about where do existing people fit versus the expectations at their given level. So what are the competencies, what do you expect at a particular level, and then looking at individual, where are they vis-a-vis those expectations on performance as well as on the potential that they bring for that responsibility level and the next responsibility level. Once you've made that assessment, you can then start looking at who are the people who need to be developed further for current role or developed for future role, or are ready to be moved on to a new level of responsibility. So those decisions are things that you can then start taking. So is it about continuity in the current role and improvement for that, or is it that you need to move the person to similar role but with more complexity and slowly develop for higher roles, or is it that the person is ready to be moved to a higher responsibility level? When this is clear to you and to the organization, when this is a shared understanding across the organization, the culture that begins to get built is that people see movement and growth as an opportunity to take on higher responsibility, and also see it as something they will get when they have genuinely built their competence and capability. It will also allow the organization then to consciously start investing in people development and help them to grow to new levels and take on new challenges. And if you recall what we discussed at the start, that for most people, development will happen when they are exposed to different kinds of challenges. Some development will happen when they are given feedback and coaching, and 10% is through skill development, through classroom training. So when there's clarity around what you expect in terms of performance and what's the potential that you are looking for at different different levels, it will become easier for you to give challenges or design challenges to help people expand their competence, and it will become easier for you to give them feedback around those areas. So that is something that you need to look at. Let me share with you typical responsibilities that exist. This is based on the work done. Organizations, 6 kinds of responsibilities. Contributor, someone who brings individual expertise. At the next level is the manager of individuals, where he is accountable for managing a team of individual contributors and helping get the best out of their expertise. At the third level is the manager of managers, someone who has to manage multiple managers and help them get the best out of their people, and then help them develop to be able to take on higher responsibility. At the fourth level is that of a functional head, where people begin to head functions. Once they have headed functions, at the next level is the group head level, where it's like an SBO head, where you begin to head small businesses or a group of functions, and finally it is the business head, which is really the role that you're playing, that of a CEO. All right, it's giving me feedback, said you missed. Please send in to Viral, and I'll cover that again. Okay. Now, in small smaller organizations, there are perhaps going to be true for a lot of you. There are really 4 levels of responsibility: that of an individual contributor, the manager of individual contributors or a department head, the manager of managers or a function head, and the business head. This comes from an assumption that right now, for a lot of you, you are at a level of growth where you will need to have a functional organization. In that case, the functional head should be reporting into the business head, and there will be managers or department heads reporting to the functional head, and then individual contributors below them. It's quite possible that today the department heads themselves may be like the functional heads, and so you may have only 3 levels. Over a period, chances are these are the 4 levels to which the organization will grow to. All right, let me share with you some common issues. I've shared some of these earlier, but let me share it again. One common issue that I've heard is dialogue that, this person has been there in the organization for long, we must promote him, we need to move this person. And so the person is moved up to newer designations, eventually reaching a level where both the person and the all value from the individual. The organization struggles because the person has been there for long and you don't know what to do with the individual. The person struggles because the person is feeling miserable that the person is not able to perform. So it's a lose-lose. So think about, are you facing situations where you've been promoting people only because the person has been in the organization for long? The second aspect that I hear, the second issue is that, look, this person is a great performer, a good performer. Let's promote him or her. And very often, again, organizations do this purely on the basis of the performance at the current level. And I'm sure you would have heard of or perhaps experienced situations where a great salesperson is promoted and becomes a lousy sales manager. So you've lost a great salesperson and you've got a lousy manager. So where was the issue? The issue really is in the potential. Some people bring potential to take on higher and higher responsibility. Some people can be developed to enhance their potential. However, there are some who are good for a certain role, and moving them up only on the basis of good performance to a higher role is again creating disaster both for the person and for the organization. So again, think about how are you promoting people in your organization, and also think about, do you have clarity about the basis on which you will move people and what you expect from each level. The third issue which I've heard is that, look, this person is good, let's send him to a training program and the person will be ready for the next level. Again, this is something that we discussed, that only a training program may not suffice. What it requires is for the people and the organization to put their head together to look at how you can create new challenges for the individual to be able to expand their thinking, able to expand their capability and competence. Okay? So these are some of the issues I've heard around this area, and my invitation to you is to reflect on whether these are issues that you've been facing. All right, so those are things that I had to cover. If there are questions, Viral, if there are questions that have come in, I'll be happy to take them on. Or if there are specific aspects that any of you want to discuss, just flash it on the screen, give it to Viral, and I'll be happy to respond to that. So I see a question. 1 second. So from Manisha, it says, when the company has new products, brands, and international business being added on, but company cannot afford a new team, how do you influence existing team to take up the responsibility with an added incentive, as in the future we would bring in new talent? Okay. So the question is, first of all, is your assessment that the current team can take that responsibility up? If the answer is yes, then it would help to share the plans with the team, get their buy-in, get them to dialogue around what we need to do as an organization to be able to meet those needs, and get volunteers who can, assuming you believe that everyone can take it up, then get people to volunteer. Otherwise, have a dialogue with those who you believe can and take that on, and invite them to handle that additional responsibility. At the same time, you will need to understand what is their concern in taking on that responsibility. If their concern is that they do not have the right capability or the competence, you would know what kind of development needs to be done. If the concern is that they cannot handle so much workload, then you'll need to figure out how to distribute the work that's there. So again, there is no one answer, but what really is the context in which people are not willing to take their additional responsibility up is what will determine the steps that you need to take. I hope it gives you some thought. How to get good people, salespeople. I'm going to respond in two parts. One is if it is about sources, then you need to, I don't know what are the sources you've looked at, but sites like Naukri.com, etc., could give you a fairly good supply of people who would be available for sales. Right? However, if it is about about how do I attract them into the organization, then it is those aspects that we discussed, that you need to be clear what are you offering these people compared to any other organization that they can work on. Also, you need to be clear what are those critical parameters that you're willing to, which are completely non-negotiable for you, and what are those parameters that you're willing to invest in or give a go by. For example, there are organizations which choose to say that, look, when I get a fresh person, the person's ability to learn, the person's willingness to do a lot of hard work, and the person's some basic values, okay, in terms of being honest, is far more critical than the skills of selling, and that's something that I'll build. So it is always going to be a decision of what you can build and what is a non-negotiable. So that is something which will help you look at how you recruit and get good people. If that doesn't answer your question, then I'm going to request you to be a bit more specific in your question.
Right. The question was more on the sales team, how to recruit a good sales team, which I suppose you already answered in part. Right, Pankaj?
Okay.
Yeah, there is one more question that has...
If it is... Yeah.
Would you like to take the next question or get some more insights on this?
Yes, yes.
Right. So one of the question is...
Yeah, so while the person... Go on. Hello?
Yeah. So the next question is, how do you create responsibility amongst people?
How do you create responsibility amongst people? So I'm going to ask the entire audience, think about how do you feel a sense of responsibility? What are situations when you feel a sense of responsibility? Now, chances are, and this is based on my experience and bias, that when people are involved in determining what needs to be done, and they feel a sense of capability, and they have clarity on how to get that done, they will take on the responsibility. If one of these is missing, then it will be difficult for them. So they may have the intent, but they will find it difficult to get it done. So today, if you are experiencing a lack of responsibility, look at what is missing. Is it that people have not been involved in determining what needs to be done? Is it that they don't have the capability? Or is it that they are not clear on what will help them get to where they have to go? So when you start asking these questions, you're likely to find answers about why people are not taking on responsibility. Also reflect on your own life, and what has allowed you to take on that sense of responsibility. What do we feel responsible for? More often than not, when we consider something precious to us, important to us, is when we feel that sense of responsibility. So the question is, how do we create that sense of importance for that person? The other ways to do that is to help the person know what are the consequences of what the person will get or lose if the person were to deliver on that responsibility. So after having involved, after having built the capability, and after having helped the person figure out the how to do it, the person should also be clear about the consequences, both positive and negative, of not living up to that responsibility or of living up to that responsibility. I hope that gives you some clarity. I only want to state before we move on to the next question that in dealing with people, it's unlikely that you'll have one magic formula. If you get the underlying principles right and apply those principles, you will find the formula, apply some standard practice, chances are you could fall flat. The principles, however, will still be relevant. So I hope it helps. Let's get to the next question. And in the meantime, arising from the response, please send it to Viral. Yes, Viral, the next one.
One more question that has come up is qualitative measurement possible for the results outcome of an employee, or it should be quantifiable only? Often aspects of job involves quality output, say filling documentation.
Okay, so let's look at now what you've raised is a very important aspect, that there are some jobs which are more, let's say, activity oriented and repetitive in nature as against some other jobs. Especially at junior levels, the roles are far more activity oriented compared to senior levels, where there is a lot of scope of improvement, where you can have clear-cut goals, etc. However, despite that, when you look at junior levels, even if you look at the tasks, so let's say the one about filling documentation, ask yourself, what will tell you that the person has done a good job of filling the documentation, or that the person has done a great job of filling up documentation? In most cases and most organizations, you're likely to end up with two parameters. One is the quality, which could be about percentage accuracy, or about the percentage rework, or it could be about timeliness. Now, if it's very critical for the business to be able to assess these two objectively, then it is important to set up a measure for those and then measure it objectively and assess it objectively. However, if it is not so critical for the organization, you could choose to assess it qualitatively. But be rest assured that in qualitative assessment, there will be the scope of disagreement between two people. As long as it is objective and quantified, there's hardly any scope for disagreement. You can't fight data. Okay? So, for example, in a BPO kind of an organization, if the time taken to respond to a client is important, then it will be important for the organization to set up the measure and actually measure how much time people are taking to respond. And if there's a standard, deviation from the standard or number of times deviation or extent of deviation will become an objective measure. However, in let's say in any other organization, which in any other commercial organization where this is perhaps not such a critical thing, you may not set up a strict measure or a strict way to track this. You may just rely on feedback from customers, whether they are experiencing a good service or not. So that's another way to assess performance. So whether it should be qualitative or quantitative is a choice you will have to make based on the criticality of that measure or that standard for your organization. The only thing you have to be clear is that as long as it is qualitative, the chances of a dispute are far higher than when it is quantitative. When it is quantitative, you will not be able to fight data. What you may argue about, and that should happen at the start, is whether the stretch or the standard being demanded is right or not. But that's something you can discuss at the start and learn how to course correct on that based on actual data. But in the case of qualitative, there's no way you can even set any of those. Right? I hope it helps you get a direction. Any other question, Viren?
Yes, Pankaj.
Or adjacent questions?
Yes, we have few questions in the line, and I suppose we have time to take them up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one very straightforward question is recruitment sources for SMEs.
Recruitment sources for Ascent.
SMEs.
SMEs.
Yeah.
So I shared about that earlier. There are a lot of websites now, Naukri.com, Monster.com, Rediffmail.com, Timesjobs.com. So a lot of these websites, if you register and ask for CVs, you're likely to find many people. Now it depends on, again, at what level you're looking at. If it is at a staff level and above, staff to managers and above, these sites are likely to be useful. However, if it is at a workman level, then, or contract workman level, then you will have to look at regional availability and availability around your plant and location. And there is no, the sources then there become schools around you, people, communities around you. Go and talk to them and get it from there. So these are some of the ways that I have experienced or used or heard.
Great, Pankaj. One more question. I suppose this is a bit related to a past question, which is techniques of strong implementation of policies in a company.
Okay, for implementing policies, what I'm going to share is completely my bias, that in many organizations, policies are created without considering the underlying rationale or the need for why you need that policy. Let me give you an example. And that's where the issue starts. For example, a travel policy. Now, is the underlying philosophy of the organization that the purpose of the travel policy is to represent a certain status in the market, or is the purpose of the organization for the policy to allow for comfortable travel without being ostentatious or without being too luxurious in spending? Now looking at that will help you determine what is the policy in terms of the amounts that you should set. Now when that is not clear, then people start getting into comparison, because no matter what amount you set, someone can always find something which is better off in another organization. So when you are clear about the underlying philosophy and share that with the people, the rationale, you can then move the policy to more of a guideline than something which is cast in stone. Similarly for leave, what's the philosophy behind leave? Is the philosophy that you want people, especially when it comes to privileged leave, is the philosophy that you want people to genuinely take time off and rejuvenate, or is it that it's a money-making mechanism? If you're clear about the philosophy, then you will lay down rules accordingly. So very often, again, people do not look at why a policy exists, and then they struggle to get the policy implemented. The third thing is that the kind of policies you're looking at, are you taking into account the needs of the organization and the people and then determining policy, or is it just on a random basis? And are you finding alternate ways to deal with the needs rather than just create a policy or stop a need from being met because of a policy, or completely meet a need and then feel terrible about it as an organization? So here's an example. So especially in plants, in manufacturing organizations, at the plants, there is a need. If it's a far off, there may be a need for food. Now, is the philosophy that the organization is like the provider, and therefore you will set up a canteen and facilities and manage it, or is the philosophy that you want people to be far more responsible and work and behave as responsible people, and therefore figure out a team, create a team who will then create mechanisms to provide for food while meeting the organization needs? Because in the former, when it is the philosophy of provider, every time people will keep coming back and saying this is not good, that's not good, keep cribbing, and then you'll be wondering what the hell's going on. On the other hand, if the philosophy is that we want people to behave responsibly the way they would at home, because food is a need even there, and get people to own up how they can meet the needs of the people and the organization, chances are they will come up with creative solutions which will help you create something which works for both the people and the organization. So think about how you are creating policies and how you are approaching the creation of policies. I hope that gives some clarity. Viral, any other question?
There is one last question that I have got.
Yeah.
That's
Sure.
Why people work well when given a set of tasks, they fail when they are given a brief. This becomes a bottleneck when promoting people. Please suggest.
I'm sorry, just repeat that again. While people
Work well when given a set of tasks,
huh,
they fail when they are
Okay.
given a brief. This becomes a bottleneck when promoting people. So basically, I suppose trying to say that, initiativeness from the people is bit less. So set tasks they are able to do, but when they are given a brief, they are not able to take it forward.
Sure. Now, there are two things which happen. Again, if you go back, remember when we spoke about selecting people, if the people you have selected are ones who are comfortable working on instructions, then getting them to move, to be able to apply their thinking and work on briefs is going to be difficult. It's a journey you'll have to help them make. However, if you the other thing is, when you give people the opportunity to work on briefs, understand what is coming in their way. Is it that they're not sure of how to proceed on that, and they need some initial guidance before they start building the capability, or is there a fear that if they were to do it and fail, they would be hauled up? So if that is the case, then again chances are they will be afraid of taking risks. So I don't know what's relevant in your situation, but these are some of the things that could come in the way. So one is where people have been recruited who will only operate on instructions, and that was the requirement at that point in time, and so they are frozen in time, and you need to get them out of it, or that they need hand-holding to be able to actually find out how to do things, and then once they are done, they will move with it, and there is no fear of failure. The other is that if for long, maybe there are people who are the thinking types, if for long they have experienced only instructions being given, and now suddenly they are asked to work on a brief, they will find it difficult. Again, there will be that inertia. So these are some of the possible reasons why this could be happening. So I don't know what's relevant in your context. If any of these is relevant, think about this, and that will give you a clue about what needs to be done.
Great,
I hope
Pankaj.
this gives you some clarity. Yeah.
Sure.
Yes,
So-
Viral?
Sure. This was the last question, Pankaj, that we had. And thanks a lot for sharing.
Are
your
there any
insight.
adjacent questions based on the responses?
I'm not yet getting anywhere. So
I'm sorry?
I have not got any questions as of now. So
Okay.
I suppose there are no questions, right? So thanks a lot, Pankaj, for sharing the insights.